Hi folks, Jennifer Nelson here with Pocket Hours. Pocket Hours is the only podcast made by realtors for realtors. Come listen as I interview high-producing brokers to hear their best practices. And don't forget that while you are listening, you are also earning clock hour credit. Tune in every other week to hear from someone new, and please remember to tell your broker friends about Pocket Hours so more folks can elevate their business. Be the agent you would hire. Looking forward to having you listen in. Hello folks, Jennifer Nelson here with Pocket Hours. I have the privilege today of interviewing my friend, Drew Smith. Drew Smith is with Urban Seattle Commercial Real Estate, and he is a master of being a dirt dog. For those of you unfamiliar with that term, he has figured out an entire business, a very profitable one, on working with builders to find dirt, working with brokers to also find dirt, and then building new construction all over the city. I love this interview because Drew is so down to earth. He's very knowledgeable, and he's really easy to work with. So brokers, pay attention. This is a good partner to have in this business and someone you want to get to know. Without further ado, here's Drew Smith. Hi, thanks for being on the show.
You're welcome.
And the reason I asked Drew to be on the show is because he's been at this for a long time, doing real estate, doing developing, doing all kinds of fun stuff that we're going to get into in a minute. But he's got a different kind of slant on how he sees the market, how he goes after the market, what comes to him, what he develops. And I think it'll just be really fun for you to hear from him. He is not a traditional broker in the sense of resale for residential, but you'll hear more about that in a minute. So Drew, first of all, kind of tell us a little bit for those people on the show that don't know you. Who are you? Pets, family? What do you do for fun?
Yeah, so Drew Smith, I work for a company called Urban Commercial Partners. Lived here in Seattle ever since attending University of Washington. I live with my husband, Michael, and our dog, Zelda. We just moved from Capitol Hill to West Seattle, and we're getting used to a new house and a new neighborhood, and we're loving it.
That's cool. Yay, I'm so glad you're close by me. We got the luxury of that the other night where we just got to happenstance call each other and go to dinner, and that was fun.
It's been a lot of fun. It's very different vibe over here. My stress level is down at least 2 full points. That's what I was telling Michael the other night.
I love it. That's so cool. Well, welcome to West Seattle. We love it.
Thank you.
And then, Drew, how long have you been doing this real estate thing?
So I had to do the math this morning to figure that out. It's 16 years, which 16 seems years, crazy to me. Yeah. But yeah, about 16 years. And I've been with a couple of different companies from the beginning, but not very many, really just 2, I guess 3 technically, but our current company had a different name before. So yeah, so I've been largely doing the same thing for 16 years.
Wow. And then before I ask you questions about what you actually do, before 16 years, so take us back to 16 years ago, what were you doing before this?
Ooh, probably spending, evenings out too late, too often. I was fairly young. I was traveling a lot. I was kind of fresh out of college, working at a surf shop, hourly jobs, and just kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life.
I love it.
Yeah,
surf
when life
shop
was easy, remember?
It's hard to remember. It's a long time ago now. What made you 16 years ago say, this is what I want to do? What drew you to this industry?
Well, I had been in sales jobs and I knew that I was good at sales, or I thought I was good at sales, and I enjoyed it. And my dad had been a real estate broker he retired after about 40 years in the business, residential. At that time, I don't know, I'd have to do the math, but he'd been in there for 30 plus years. I saw what that meant and the freedom that could allow. And I didn't want to do exactly what my dad did. I didn't want to follow in his footsteps exactly, but I liked what I saw. At that time, travel was one of the most important aspects of my life. And so I needed a career that would allow me to do that. So I wanted a career, not a job, but I wanted something that could fund the lifestyle I wanted to live and then also allow me to be my own boss and take time off. That was sort of my most important value at the time. And it still is. But that's a bit of a coincidence that it still is. But that is one of the things about real estate I love the most.
For sure. The flexibility in it. And yeah. you sort of get to say, okay, this is what I'm going to focus on for a little while. And then I'm going to go to Italy for 3 weeks and then I'll come back and focus again.
Yeah. And as I've gotten older, I've learned, what opportunity cost is. And, I do it a lot less and for shorter times, and it's much more reasonable. But it's still, that freedom to be my own boss and, kind of create my own destiny is still very important to me. So I still enjoy it.
I love it. Me too. Yeah, you're 16. I'm 20 years in. I mean, we're old timers now.
That's crazy.
Never thought I'd say that. Tell us the difference between what you do versus what I do.
I am part owner of a commercial brokerage. What commercial real estate typically means is you're selling investment properties, or it's commercial leasing. It could be industrial properties, large scale commercial. It can also mean multifamily properties, right? So there is a residential aspect to it. There's 3 owners. The other 2 partners focus almost entirely on multifamily and true commercial property, and so do the brokers that work for us. But what I've done and always done is sort of focused on land sales. So it could be argued that what I do is residential, and it could be argued that what I do is commercial. I'm kind of a tweener, kind of in between. So because my clients are professionals and work for development companies or own development companies, and because I sell land to developers, I consider that commercial. But as most of your listeners probably know, here in Seattle, we have a tradition with development of single family or residential properties like townhouses. There is this tradition that there are listbacks. The listings of those properties are given to the person that brought the developer the land. So when we shift in that direction, it does become exactly what you do. It's residential real estate. So about half my time I would call commercial, and about half my time I would call residential.
And then for the 16 years you've been doing this, what you've developed, I would guess, and I know this from talking to you, are these relationships with these developers that say, hey, we know Drew knows what he's doing. We know he knows how to find a lot, a land lot, and sell it to us ready to go because he knows all the steps or the questions we're going to ask prior to being willing to buy it. So do you sort of do that prep work ahead of time, or how does that work?
Yeah, I do. In sort of an unofficial way. So there are brokers that do what I do that have people that work for them that do nothing but feasibilities, and they really go a few steps further than I do to package together properties for sale to developers. What my strategy has always been a little less formal than that. So I do a little bit of research on my own and just kind of, through my years in the business, know what's going to make a good development site and what's not. And I know what the first few questions that are going to be asked are, and I make sure that I have answers. And if there's a wrinkle or a difficulty with the site, then I'll go a little further and delve in and try to make the site as sellable as possible to people that are going to want it. But a lot of the feasibility work that would need to be done, I let the client do that. But yeah, I mean, what you're getting at is that it is a relationship business, right? So I do have long relationships with these people. And at the end of the day, they'll look at sites from anybody, but they're only going to spend their time and pick up the phone during a busy work week talking to somebody who they know consistently brings them good things. So I do enough research to make sure that what I'm bringing them, hopefully, is something that they're going to be interested in. And, over the years, you tend to bring and only bring high quality opportunities. And then that's how you get them to pick up the phone more often.
And are you out seeking those yourself? Is that what you're doing, is finding them, or are people bringing them to you, or how does that work?
All of the above. So
okay.
My husband will tell you that when I'm driving around, if I see something that looks underutilized, it's not unusual for me to send myself a voice memo or an email with an address. We do a lot of farming, typical through title companies, letters followed up by phone calls and emails if necessary. And then probably 50% of the deals that I get done are brought to me from other brokers, either in my own company or outside. So I do a lot of work collaborating with other brokers.
Okay. And we're going to get to that sort of piece of it in a minute, because I think that's a little bit of what I want the listeners to hear from you, is how they can work with you on things. But
Sure.
Just as a segue into something else for a minute, the industry shifts and ebbs and flows all the time. I mean, you and I the other night at dinner were just talking about, boy, this is a different industry, a different market right now.
Sure.
In terms of the interest rate being higher. So what are some of the changes you've seen in the last couple of years in the real estate industry?
Yeah. I mean, part of me feels that it's the same, right? We have these ebbs and flows, and we did 10 years ago and 16 years ago and 2 years ago. And so this, although we're kind of going through some change now, it feels typical to me and somewhat expected. But I think the things that have changed in the last couple of years, won't be news to most of your listeners. I think it's just that the buyers have more resources available online and otherwise with, companies like Zillow and Redfin, of course, and maybe are more educated and maybe know what they want. So it's not uncommon for buyers to walk into some of our projects ready to make an offer and not even have a broker. In a good market, I think a realtor or a broker is an order taker these days, where a buyer may say, I want to go look at this house, and then I want to see this house, and then I want to see this one on Saturday, and they'll tell you which one they want, and that's it. But when the market shifts, as we know, our job gets harder. We become a lot more than order takers. So I think that's where we're headed now. But to answer your question, that's really one of the few changes I've seen in the last few years, is just buyers' access to information.
Absolutely. I just will comment on that, because I think we used to say in real estate, residential real estate, that you needed to be an expert in a neighborhood.
Sure.
And I don't think that's true anymore. I think that everybody's an expert in an area they want to live in, particularly the buyer. So a seller that says, I need to find the agent that works this neighborhood, I would say to them, it's less important that you find that. It's more important that you find an agent that has high list to sale price ratio, or someone who does a lot of deals, or someone who you connect with, because the information's available for everyone. So it's shifted in that way.
Yeah. And not to say that a broker can just show up, write an offer, and get their client a good deal. There does need to be some legwork that goes into it. But any broker who's willing to put a few days walking comps and doing some online research and learning a neighborhood they may not have been familiar with before can get caught up in pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where I think the focus used to be, well, so-and-so works this neighborhood, they're the one to call. And it's like, well, they do, but there's also 10 others that could do as equally as good of a job that isn't known for that area.
Yeah, and I think I've proven that in a way, because what I do is not neighborhood specific, and it couldn't be if I wanted to have a full career, right? I mean, we really have to cast a wider net than that. So it's not uncommon for me at all to be driving to a part of town that I've never seen before. That's getting rarer, of course, but driving to a part of town that I've never seen before to look at a site that I heard about, and having to get caught up and get up to speed on that specific market real quickly in order to speak intelligently about the project and, meet the builder's expectations. So it can be done.
It can be done. Exactly. What do you think? You can think of your group of builders that you work with regularly, and I know that changes also, as we were talking about the other night. Just here's a group of builders that what they're looking for, but this market's now shifted a little bit, so you might be tapping into a different set. But is there any generalities that you can speak to about what builders look for from someone like you? Like, what do they want?
Well, again, that changes a lot, right? So I'll give you an example. So a year and a half ago, most of the well-established developers were doing so well and were moving so quickly that they didn't want to waste their time with small sites, right? So the labor market, there was a big shortage, and you need, one project manager can't really oversee more than maybe 2 or 3 projects. So if you have 25 4-unit townhouse projects spread around the city, then you have to staff up in a way that most can't. So what they prefer to do would be to have 5 really large projects spread around the city, and it makes their sort of back office operations smoother and easier and more lucrative. So a year and a half ago, everybody wanted large projects. A large project to me in the city of Seattle is, call it 20 units and above. Now, because of perceived risk with market changes and construction costs and all the things that I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, most developers aren't willing to take that big of a risk, and neither are their equity sources. So they're sort of back to smaller projects and easier projects. So straight over tackle, sites that are simple, that don't require a long design review process from the city. So we're talking something without a lot of slope, without a lot of utility issues, without a lot of trees, just the easy stuff. That's what they're willing to take risks on. So that target shifts all the time. And on even a larger scale, we shift back and forth, my team, between focusing our time and attention towards townhouse projects. And sometimes the scale will slide back towards multifamily apartments. So we've done everything from downtown high-rise projects, lots of in-city podium, like large apartment projects, and then townhouses, and we kind of go wherever the market tells us. The skill set is largely the same. The client base is largely not the same. So, so right now it's the low risk, easy for sale product, like small townhouse projects that we're looking for.
Got it. Pocket Hours is brought to you by Scout Real Estate. Hi, I'm Jennifer Nelson, owner at Scout Real Estate. I started this firm with the vision of doing things differently, with our focus on legendary service for our clients and creating a community of producing agents to spur each other to do higher quality work. If you are interested in learning more about how a small group of like-minded brokers have come together to have some fun while doing a lot of business, reach out to me, 206-227-7966, or email jennifer@scoutrealestate.com. I promise you this, fun is a high priority for me, but so is winning. So if you appreciate those two things, you might be interested in Scout. Looking forward to hearing from you. You and I have worked together, talked about different sites along the time, and I've worked with others over the years. And it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that somebody that says, we want to sell our parents' house and it's sitting on this lot that for sure could be developed. Is there an opportunity for them to stay in the house for a while, while they figure out what's next? And I think that's sort of a builder's dream in a way, is to say, hey, can we wait to close on this while we do all our due diligence? So can you speak to that a little bit on timing?
Sure. Yeah. So the timelines of a development sale is totally different than a regular residential sale. I mean, typically somebody who's buying a house wants in as soon as possible or within a reasonable time frame. Maybe it's 30, maybe it's 60 days, but that would be on the long end of a residential transaction. And with development, to developers and builders, time is money, right? So the minute they close on a property, the clock starts ticking and they're paying interest. And often it's hard money loans or construction loans that they're using to purchase these properties. So the interest rates are high. So if they can buy a property with a long close, as close to when they can actually start development as possible, then it saves them a lot of money every month in interest savings. And that savings can either translate to a higher profit margin for the developer or to more money for the seller. We are most commonly looking for deals with about a 1-year closing. The most common offer that I write is a 30-day feasibility period during which we do all of the due diligence that we need to, and then about a 12-month close from then. And that will get most small residential new construction projects pretty close to when they have a permit. The builder can close on it then and then start work right away. That's the ideal scenario for a builder, and sometimes the ideal scenario from a seller. So the scenario that you described, that would work well. Or if it translates to more money, a lot of sellers aren't in a hurry and they'd rather have the money.
Makes sense. How many of those stay together? Because one of the concerns in residential real estate is the longer the close, the more opportunity there is for back out. And so how does that work in your neck of the woods? Is that
you're
true?
Right.
Or?
Yeah, no, it is true. A lot can happen in a year. But I would say surprisingly that by far the majority of deals that I put together, if they waive their feasibility and they determined that it's a site worth working on, the majority, I don't know what the figures are, it's probably 80% or higher stay together towards closing. And keep in mind that there's earnest money that becomes non-refundable at some point during that process. And then there's also a lot of time, effort, resources, and money spent by the builder to get it that far as well. So it's more than just the earnest money they put down. It's not uncommon to put 6 figures of money into a project long before you even submit for permits. So they try their best to keep them together, but major things can go wrong in the world and shift people's priorities. And we have had deals not close.
Yeah, it's a good reminder for me too. The earnest money was kind of what I was focusing on, because obviously in residential real estate, traditionally, that's what we have to go back to, right? Is the forfeiture of earnest money. But it's a good point to remind that you said, and for our listeners to hear, is that when a developer does give that earnest money and the feasibility study is done, by the time we're getting closer to closing, the last thing they want to do is pull out too, because they've invested considerable money to get to the point where they can start to build on it. And so everybody's on the same team to get it done. That's a good reminder. Yeah.
Yeah. The earnest money is often the smallest portion of risk. So yeah, there can be a lot goes into these projects. So
for sure. What do you think are, you've already sort of named some of them, but are there any other challenges that you see about, I mean, what you do is hard. Not everybody can do it. And you've developed relationships over the years, but what else is hard about what you do?
I think staying nimble and flexible and going where the market dictates is important and can be challenging for a lot of people. The biggest challenge for me versus what you're more commonly used to doing in residential is probably it goes back to that deal timeline. Because keep in mind that I don't get paid until these deals close. So, my sort of forecast for income and also just pipeline is longer. So it's not uncommon for me to have to wait 3 years to be able to list a project that we've sold. So it's constantly sort of looking forward and keeping that pipeline full and making sure you're doing what you need to do to sort of stay on top of things. We also do everything that you do during your deal timeline for a year, right? So there's a lot of handholding sometimes with these sellers, especially, and sometimes the buyers, and there's difficulties with the project. And we don't get to walk away from that when the feasibility is done. We have to kind of continue to babysit these deals all the way through. So a lot of multitasking, let's just put it that way.
Yeah. And project management. I mean, however many deals you have going on and
Right.
how the length of them is just spread out for sure.
Right.
And I think you make a really good point. We were talking this morning in our Scout business meeting for our brokers, just that focus on the deals you currently have. If you focus too much on those current deals, you're not going to have any business in 90 days, right? So
that's right.
It's the balancing act of, yep, I got to keep these afloat and keep them, be responsive. And I also need to be looking for what's next at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. You can't be inattentive to the deals that are in escrow, but you've got to put something else in escrow. So yeah, it's just bouncing back and forth and making sure that you're taking care of everything that needs taken care of. So
for sure. So if a realtor that's listening to this call says, oh, this sounds interesting, I'd like to work with Drew, what does it look like? How do they work with you to get, if they find land or if they know of land, what does that look like?
I welcome the opportunity to work with anybody. I work with other brokers very consistently, and I enjoy that part of my job. I'm not a broker who is only interested in looking at the stuff that we dig up. I'm happy to share, sort of the earnings from these deals. And most of the time that it comes together like that, it's a simple call or an email. Somebody will refer a broker to me, or they'll find me, or they'll know of me, and they'll say, hey, I've come across this opportunity and I think that it might be a development play, but I'm not sure. And, is this something you're interested in? And I always say, absolutely. I'd love to take a look at it. Send me the details. And, with an address alone and a little bit of the backstory so I can understand what a seller's motivations might be, I can usually give you a pretty quick response illustrating what the interest level might be from a developer and what the pitfalls might be. And a lot of them don't work out. And the highest and best use for the property is the property that's currently on the land and not redevelopment. But I can usually give a pretty quick answer. And if it's something that we're interested in working on together, typically I'd sort of take it from there and place it with the buyer. And if we can get a deal together, then everybody gets happy, at the end of it. So yeah, bring me sites. Anyone who's listening, absolutely email me sites, call with questions. I'm happy to help. I try to be as helpful as I can to anybody that calls.
For sure. And just for listeners to hear this too, I've done that many times. Drew can see an email come in from me and I'll say, hey, Drew, take a look at this. I had a site up on Beacon Hill that we tried real hard to put together, but there were trees on it that the neighbors were very interested in staying and were historical and couldn't be cut down. And it made it go away, essentially. But that's the kind of knowledge that he brings to the table, is to say, my developer's interested. Here's what needs to happen in order for this site to be developed. Another piece that I wanted to hit on with you, Drew, is it seems like people that think their land can be developed have an inflated understanding of its value. And that's not uncommon from us, but I think it's even more inflated. So we deal with sellers all the time that say, my home is amazing. This is how much we think we should sell it for, despite the market. Here's what we think it's worth. So our job is to help them learn the market. When it comes to, hey, a developer's interested, I think people see dollar signs in their eyes and they feel like, oh, it's a developer. I can shoot the moon on this. Tell us a little bit about like what goes into what that price is that they can offer.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that is common. Sometimes they're right, and it is worth far more to a developer than it would be to another home buyer. But sometimes they're wrong, or it's just not as inflated a number as they hoped it would be. Every developer has their own sets of pro formas and guidelines and numbers, and the nice thing about working with a builder is that it's not an emotional purchase, right? So they just need to figure out, what can we build? How much is it going to cost us to build it? And what can we sell it for? And then they know what their target profit margins need to be to meet the expectations of themselves or their equity group or their lender. And it's a big math formula, and it spits out a number at the end that they can afford to pay a buyer. My job is to sort of figure out roughly what that number is going to look like before we go through all of the headache of the pro formas and the feasibility process to see if we are roughly in alignment with the seller. And it takes a lot of education on our part, educating sellers what the challenges are going to be and how that costs money and translates to a lower value of their property, et cetera. So it is different, but we get there in the end. And some of them, they don't all come together, like you mentioned,
sure.
the Beacon Hill property that we worked on. Sometimes there's a tree right in the middle and we can't get around it. It's just not going to be. And that happens a lot, but it's worth fighting the fight until you can't win it. So we work on all of them if we can.
And I will add to that, just to say that because it's investment, it is truly a math equation, meaning the number's the number. Like they're not coming into this bidding because they have some emotional draw to this. They're coming into this literally looking at the math and saying, at the end of the day, how much am I going to make? And is it worth it for me to invest in it? And so helping your sellers that you approach Drew with sort of say, this is a math equation to them, period, might be helpful.
Yeah, I think you're right. There are sometimes factors that will allow a developer to stretch a little further. If they have a project going on up the street, it might be easier for them. There might be an economy of scale, but yeah, typically you're right. It's just a math equation. It's not emotional, and we come in pretty close to, if not at our highest price out of the gate often, and so I think that's a good thing for sellers to understand.
Good. What I know from listening to all kinds of things is to say that we are just short housing in Seattle, particularly. We can't catch up with the demand for new builds. We're hundreds of thousands below where we ought to be for the demand. So how do you see the current market impacting developers right now? Where do you see that going? Can they speed up? Can they buy more? How do we help that debt?
Yeah, well, right now as we talk, it's interesting times, right? We're facing a likely recession, and I'm a little bit concerned about a credit freeze, which we've seen before, and that makes things difficult, right? Builders can't get financing and commercial loans to build. So outside of that challenge, which we don't really know where that's going to land, the biggest challenge right now is construction costs. So, with inflation coming out of the pandemic and a variety of other economic factors, it's expensive to build, much more than it ever has been. So that money has to come from somewhere. And unfortunately, the only place that it can is the value of the land. So that directly impacts what people's property is worth. In terms of low inventory, the cost of housing is expensive in Seattle, and the only way to bring the cost down is to build more of it. The city's working on a few different proposals. We don't need to get into the details of all the zoning code changes because that's a rabbit hole. We'd be another whole nother podcast. But they have made some changes recently and are looking at changes in the future that would allow us to build more high density residential property in different neighborhoods of Seattle. And that will help, because if more land is available to purchase, then that'll also affect land values and make it more attainable to developers to build more often. So it's always challenging, but right now it's construction costs and potential financing issues moving forward that we're really keeping our close eye on.
Yeah, for sure. I know I reached out to you recently. I own one of my rentals is in West Seattle, and I put a tiny home behind it. And what I'm looking at doing, with the help of Drew, help me connect to the right person, is condoizing that. And we're seeing more of these sort of cottage developments where there might have been a house or two on a larger lot, even a residential street lot, where they're putting 4 or 5 homes in place of that and can sell them as condos, but they're individual homes. There's no connecting walls. You think that's going to be more of a trend happening?
Yeah, it's been popular for a little while now, but only about a year or two. So it is newer. And what people are doing is essentially you're building a single family house at the front of a lot, and the city is now allowing us to put an ADU, so an accessory dwelling unit, attached to the back of it. And then detached from it, especially if there's an alley or at the back of the lot, we'll do a dadu, which is a detached accessory dwelling unit. And then all three of them can be sold separately as condos. And that is a great way to add density to some neighborhoods. I think the city's goal was to keep neighborhoods looking the same. So as you drive or walk down the street, one of those projects looks pretty much the same as a regular single family house because you're not seeing the units that are behind it. But it's allowing us to put 3 families on a piece of property that maybe would have only housed one without changing dramatically the look of a neighborhood. So I think that's an interesting solution. It is adding value to properties, but it's also adding housing to the market, which is great. I don't know if that's enough long term. We may have to be willing to change what neighborhoods look like. I mean, if we're San Francisco, if we're heading in the direction of San Francisco, then the idea of large single family houses with big front yards is probably eventually going to fade away. But I think in this city, it's going to take a while before that happens, which maybe is not a bad thing. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, I guess you've already sort of answered a lot of these questions, but the last one I thought of was just, is there anything else you can talk to that you might say, hey, in the next 12 to 18 months, where you see the market going? I mean, we've sort of shot off on those a couple different ways in this conversation. Anything to add to that?
No, I mean, it really comes back to we're in a place right now where we don't really know what the next 12 to 18 months is going to look like. It's much less clear than it might normally be. I'm optimistic. I do think that it's going to get interesting here from a financing perspective for new construction and maybe even buyers. But, we've seen a dip in the interest rates this last week, which is really encouraging. That might continue. At the end of the day, there are people that still need to buy a home. They're still out there looking and there's no inventory. So I think that's going to continue to be a driver of our market. And I also think that there's going to be a lot of people out there that have been waiting for an opportunity like this where you may see a dip in values to get out there and buy investment property or maybe even to level up and buy a bigger home, knowing that there is going to come a time when interest rates, come back down and you just have to suck it up for a little while with the payment higher than you're comfortable, knowing that in the future, you'll be able to reduce that payment and you're getting a really great deal on a home. So I think there's a lot of encouraging opportunity, but like I said earlier, we're not order takers anymore. We have to get a little bit more creative. So those relationships that you've built are going to be as valuable as ever.
Absolutely. And you've done a great job of that. And it's fun to watch you work. You're really good at what you do. And thanks for being a friend of mine and also just a great colleague. So listeners, if you have stuff that comes up that you have a question on land deals, commercial opportunities, please reach out to Drew Smith. And Drew, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
Thank you so much for listening into Pocket Hours. I hope this has been interesting, fun, made you laugh, made you think, spurred you on to do and implement some new things in your business. I appreciate your time and hope this has been a good use of it, period. Now, go be the agent you would hire.